Hi guys, we are attempting to roll through Transcendentalism 1. I'm going to do Emerson today. This will be an addition or substitution for the Panopto video that is having trouble, or we will be able to figure it out hopefully at some point. I'll be going back and forth between me and kind of focusing on words and vocab while I talk, so hopefully that's not too annoying. This will also help you with the Emerson kind of Teams project this week, which we might be doing alone since we're quarantining. But the idea is to kind of go through an essay and find the rhetoric and the argument and possible counter arguments and the methods, the different evidence that they're using. So I'm going to help you with that through kind of this video and the stuff that I've already put for you into Canvas. So if you have available, or if you already looked at the first part in Canvas, we're going to look at the Transcendentalism vocab. Maybe. Okay, so I'm turning you around. Here's our vocab, Transcendentalism. So Transcendentalism, to transcend, means to go beyond, so I took some notes. So that just means that the principles of reality are what we perceive to be real. We have our thoughts, our emotions, and they also super believe in intuition. They believe that it's literally an intelligence, so that's kind of important. They'll say it quite a few times and sometimes even capitalize it in the middle of a sentence to say, hey, jazz hands, this is important. So basically, transcendentalists believe that you could feel something and understand it without necessarily experiencing it. They were big believers in meditation, going beyond the physical to the kind of mental and emotional, another plane to kind of help you understand that. Most of them were abolitionists. So, person who believes in doing away with law, custom, or institution. For the most part, that meant slavery, but it also means not allowing people to vote, which we'll see with Thoreau, and anything that they felt custom, belief system, norm that was unfair or unequal to people. So emancipation, release from slavery, restraint, we got that. Egalitarian, all people are equal. Color doesn't matter, gender doesn't matter, sexual orientation doesn't matter, whether or not they own land doesn't matter. Utopia, ideal place or state with perfect laws. We've been looking at that with those who walk away from Omelas, and in Candide we saw El Dorado. For your assignment this week, I have you creating, I said a commune because I'm not sure that a utopia is totally possible. But whatever that ideal place or state means to you is what you'll create later this week. Socialism, theory or system of organization by which society is classless through the public ownership and operation and means of production and distribution of goods. I will show you in Self-Reliance the exact passage that people take to try to prove that Emerson is a socialist. He wasn't necessarily a socialist per se. Did he have tendencies? Yes. And so I'll show you where those are. Metaphysics, philosophy that tries to discover and explain reality, knowledge, principles of nature and the universe. That's on your vocab sheet. We've also been looking at that previously as well. Candide. Pangloss was a cosmeo-metaphysician philosopher. So that he's also trying to look at those things. Intuition, that I said often, capital I. Immediate perception or understanding, you guys already know what that is. Unitarian, belief that God is one person, not the Trinity. Some religions believe Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Emerson was a Unitarian minister, so he's more about God as just one God or entity. Utilitarianism, we've already looked at a couple of times. So I have here, belief greatest good for the greatest number should be the purpose of human conduct, regardless of motive. And we also have, what about at one person's expense or destruction? which we looked at with the Omelas as well. And suffrage is just the right to vote, and they believed that women and everybody should have the right to vote. Okay, on the back, or scrolling down if you're on Canvas, is more transcendental notes. And these are predominantly Emerson. I'm going to give you a little bit of Thoreau that we're going to come back to next week. But the oversoul is this cosmic connection. He literally believed that everybody, if God made people and animals and trees, that we all had these pieces of soul and that we're all connected because we're from the same creator. So he believed also that people should treat people better because they all have that soul, which is nice too. So Zen, pure awareness, ground zero, and phenomenology. If you took 1B, we focused on that as well, that you can try to have total objectivity and no bias, which is really difficult, of course, but to try to figure that out is important. Well, especially in argument, you want to see both sides or multiple sides of an argument. So I have that Emerson wrote nature, and if you know nature, to know yourself, and that's important in Earth Day and World kind of Earth Nature Day and beyond. Emerson wrote nature and Self-Reliance, which we're going to look at today. He believed you should trust yourself and that each individual is responsible for their own self, their actions, and then their world too, because if everybody's responsible for themselves, then they're going to create that world. He believed God was in nature with the oversoul that I already explained. He believed that nature helped you get closer to yourself and helped center you. And whether that was a mental, physical, or emotional experience, that's up to you. So I ask you where you go and why. Some people go to the beach, the mountains, green space, whatever works for you. I also give you some utopias to talk about, which is Brook Farm, Massachusetts. Hawthorne lived there, if you read Scarlet Letter previously, in addition to Emerson. They believed in total equality, to work half the day and study half the day. And they, I put that their export was a newspaper because a lot of people thought they were like these kind of 1840 hippies and that they had their own society. And they really thought they had it figured out, but they needed to make some money and be able to trade. So they wrote a newspaper, which people bought. And unfortunately, they didn't plan out everything because the whole place burned down and they didn't really have a fire department in kind of ready to go. So kind of a bummer. I give you some more examples of communes and talking about what your utopia would look like from an individual perspective. Then we get into Thoreau, just kind of a quick intro, and I give you some jobs for next week. That yes, he was philosopher, naturalist, learned Transcendentalism from Emerson. He wrote Walden while living on Emerson's land, so Emerson had a little more coin than Thoreau did. He did lots of odd jobs to kind of make money and survive. He believed to live simply, read, experience, gain knowledge, and that you could do that through nature. So if you've read any part of Walden in high school maybe, or before in college, that he kind of, instead of chapters, there were seasons, and he kind of did his experiment for a couple of years to figure out what he could from the animals, the plants, other people he came in contact with. Then we're going to get into on the duty of civil disobedience when we do Thoreau. Some people just call it civil disobedience, but I want you to know the other title also because we're going to get into duty and responsibility a little more heavily. So I have on your definition that it's a political action involving intentional violation of the law in order to draw attention to alleged injustices, and questions for you to think about: what government is best and why, and how Thoreau influenced Gandhi and MLK and a few other people as you kind of read through what's happening in Transcendentalism and Transcendentalism 2. So let's look at self-reliance, and just in hopefully not too annoying, but kind of a tedious way, I'm going to show you some of his great concepts. You're going to want to be able to find thesis, so claim plus warrants and argument. I'm also going to show you some of the beautiful things of his work, and take notes however you want. I included the PDF in the module if your books are unavailable. So let's look at self-reliance. Okay, so not super effective, but let me switch camera. So self-reliance is about believing in yourself for sure. And also he wants us to believe that who we are and what we believe and what we think is a little piece of genius. So when he talks about, there it is, the idea, so page 19, that a man should learn to detect and watch that gleam of light which flashes across his mind from within, more than the luster of the firmament of bards and sages. So there he's telling us to, and that's on the bottom of page 19, he's telling us to trust our intuition, that if we don't believe in ourselves and our own thought, we're in big trouble. Page 20, he says there is a time in every man's education when he arrives at the conviction that envy is ignorance, that imitation is suicide, and here we go, that forever for himself, for worst at his portion, that the universe is full of good, no kernel of nourishing corn can come to him but through his toil bestowed on that plot of ground which is given him to till. So he's telling us on 20 kind of similar things to Candide, that we have to cultivate our garden. He also talks about trusting ourselves, and if we don't, we can't have hope, that there are certain things we have to accept, whether they be divine elements or things that we can or cannot control. Sometimes we need to accept them. He also brings up in the bottom of the 20, and notice the capitalization, the chaos and the dark. So he is kind of explaining that there are going to be dark times, there are going to be chaotic times, and it's up to us to protect ourselves and to do what is best for society. He says on 21, society everywhere is in conspiracy against the manhood of every one of its members. It's a joint stock company in which the members agree for the better securing of his bread to each shareholder to surrender the liberty and culture of the eater. I'm going to walk and let out my dog because he's freaking out. But that page is where people tried to claim that Emerson and Thoreau were socialists because of that joint stock company and the idea that you could be in a business and there didn't need to be a power structure, like someone else is in charge, someone's the manager, someone's the worker. So their belief system was that everybody should be equal. So he continues to say that self-reliance is its aversion to conformity. He said people in society conform at the expense of their individuality, and that becomes kind of dangerous sometimes. Whereas we're also seeing during quarantine that it's dangerous if people don't conform to what's expected. There's protesters in some states taking back their state and wearing assault weapons that are saying, I don't want to conform, like this is against my individualism. So there are always going to be those gray areas that sometimes it's good to conform if it's what is necessary to help people in a global pandemic. But since we're writing in 1840, that we don't have to worry about that yet, but they will experience their own. We talked about the plague with our ethos, pathos, logos as well. Okay, 22. He says at the bottom of the page, Virtue are, in the popular estimate, rather the exception than the rule. There is the man and his virtues. Men do what is called a good action as a piece of courage or charity, much as they would pay an expiation of daily non-appearance on parade. My life is for itself and not for the spectacle. What he means by that is that some people will do charity or do good acts to kind of influence how other people see them, and they'll tell you about it. He said people need to do what's right just because it's right, not because somebody will recognize them for it. And he says on 23, it's easy to live in the world after the world's opinion. It's easy in solitude to live after our own. But the great man is he who in the midst of the crowd keeps with perfect sweetness the independence of solitude. That it is our responsibility, no matter what we value, no matter what our belief system is, to stick by those values. They may change. You may be a meatitarian one day and then a vegetarian the next, and he basically says that's okay because you don't want to conform to things just for the heck of it. But he also believes that on page 24, he says a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. So he wants you to not be consistent for consistency's sake. That the world will yell at you if you don't conform, but if you truly believe in your heart that you're doing the right thing and the necessary thing, that he says it's okay to contradict yourself because sometimes our minds change. We get new information. Then here's part of his argument. So evidence, real events, invented instances, hypotheticals, and analogies. So he's going to give us some real people on 24 and 25 to make his argument. He says, so you shall be sure to be misunderstood. Is it so bad then to be misunderstood? Pythagoras was misunderstood, and Socrates, and Jesus, and Luther, and Copernicus, and Galileo, and Newton, and every pure and wise spirit that ever took flesh. To be great is to be misunderstood. So that's on 25, where he gives us that giant list of people. Sorry if going back and forth with the book is super annoying, but I'll try and give you page numbers. So 26, he talks about customs, and he talks about people having character with a capital C. He gives us another big list on 26 of different people and what they stood for. And he kind of believes that every person has rights. And on 27, he talks about how those rights relate to school. He talks about tuitions on page 27. The inquiry leads us to that source, at once the essence of genius, of virtue, and of life, which we call spontaneity or instinct. We denote this primary wisdom as intuition, capital I, whilst other later teachings are tuitions. So tuitions you pay for if you're going to school. Intuition, that free wisdom that you get that sometimes we don't often trust. He also talks about on 27, which kind of takes us back to Slaughterhouse, which is kind of exciting for me because I love when things work out. But he says, for the sense of being which in calm hours rises, we know not how in the soul is not diverse from things, from space, from light, from time, from man, but one with them, and proceeds obviously from the same source whence their life and being also proceed. So here on 27 is his illustration of the oversoul. And he's basically saying, look, time is a construct, space is a construct. Similar things we looked at with Slaughterhouse and chaos theory and the ideas of black holes and what makes sense and maybe what doesn't make sense. And his claim is that we need to discern, we need to figure out truth. We need to figure out justice. And that is one of our responsibilities. On 28, he says, whenever a mind is simple and receives a divine wisdom, old things pass away, means, teachers, texts, temples fall. It lives now and absorbs past and future into the present hour. All things are made sacred by relation to it, one as much to another. And that is on page 28. And he's explaining that, yes, time and space are ideas. He continues this on the bottom of 28. But he also says that we have a tendency to overquote other people. He quotes Descartes, I think, therefore I am. And he's like, why don't we figure out what we mean? Why don't we figure out who we are by ourselves? That's our job. An example, I would say, since he brought up the planets, that we learned that Pluto was a planet. And now we have new information, and it's some sort of dwarf star or whatever. So that sometimes we have to learn new things in new ways and figure those out. He also talks on page 29 about the soul and how it becomes. He deals with cause and effect. We said that was one of our things to look for in rhetoric. Like the bottom 2/3 of 29, he says the soul raised over passion beholds identity and eternal causation, perceives the self-existence of truth, capital T, and right, capital R, and calms itself with knowing that all things go well. Kind of interesting. And he says at the beginning of the next paragraph, life only avails, not the having lived. And that the soul does become who we are when we're born. As we grow up, we have experiences, we start thinking different thoughts, we read different things. We're going to become different types of people and grow, and our belief system is going to change. So, how does that affect our responsibility? Well, basically, he says we need to be a principled person. Page 30, he has some lovely alliteration. So one of your jobs will be to find rhetoric in the next Emerson essay. So here's some nice alliteration on 30. He wants a man who is not plastic and permeable to principles. So nice repeated P sound there. But he's talking about this idea of principle, and that it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, or what your class is, or gender is, or life experience, you can still be a good person. Sometimes we must go alone. He talks about church, he talks about religion, but basically his ideas are these